27 years ago, an entire class of young students vanished during a school trip, disappearing without a trace and leaving their families devastated. Authorities suspected the male teacher who had disappeared with them was involved, but with no bodies found and few leads to follow, the investigation eventually went cold. Yet, through all these years, one desperate mother never gave up hope, clinging to the small chance that her daughter was still out there somewhere. Then one day, while looking through old photographs, she noticed a crucial detail that everyone had overlooked. A detail that would change the entire case and shock everyone involved in ways no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Laura Calloway woke up on the morning of September 28, 2023, with a heavy heart. The gray, cloudy sky outside her window mirrored her somber mood. She had been preparing herself for this day, but even so, the grief and heartache were overwhelming. It was exactly 27 years since her daughter Rory had disappeared. Slowly, Laura rose from her bed and made her way to the dressing table. There, hanging on the mirror, was a close-up photo of Rory in her school uniform. Laura gently took the photo in her hands, her eyes welling up with tears as she gazed at her daughter's smiling face. "Oh, Rory," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. But Laura quickly took a deep breath, steeling herself against the wave of sorrow threatening to engulf her. She had endured the worst of times over the past 27 years, and she knew she had to stay strong. After washing her face and getting dressed, Laura checked her phone. There was a text from her best friend, Helen Carter. "You're not alone in this. All of us still remember. If you need company, come over to my place anytime." Helen was also a mother of one of the vanished children. Laura felt a small comfort knowing that she wasn't alone in her grief. She replied to Helen's message, asking if it would be okay to come over now. Helen's response was immediate and welcoming. Before leaving, Laura went to the kitchen and gathered a few packets of Earl Grey lavender tea and a jar of cookies from her collection. The thought of arriving empty-handed at her friend's house didn't sit well with her, even after all these years of friendship. As Laura stepped out of her house and began the short walk to Helen's, she couldn't help but reflect on the loneliness she had experienced since losing her husband. Helen had become one of the few people who truly understood her pain and had been there for her through the darkest times. The neighborhood was quiet as Laura made her way down the familiar streets. The houses looked much the same as they had 27 years ago, a stark contrast to how much her life had changed. As she approached Helen's house, just a few blocks from her own, she saw the front door open before she even had a chance to knock. Helen greeted her with a warm, understanding smile and enveloped her in a comforting hug. "Come in, Laura," she said softly, ushering Laura inside. Laura handed Helen the cookie jar and tea packets as they made their way to the kitchen. Helen busied herself with boiling water for the tea while Laura settled onto the living room sofa. The familiar surroundings of Helen's home provided a small measure of comfort on this difficult day. As they waited for the water to boil, Helen turned to Laura and asked gently, "How are you doing?" Laura sighed, her eyes downcast. "I'm trying to keep it together, you know how it is. This day is always the hardest." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Even though I've learned to live with it, the past still haunts me, especially today." Helen nodded in understanding. "It's the same for me," she admitted. "Remember, I completed my therapy last year. While I've accepted the past and tried to rein in all the what-ifs that would eat me alive, I can't deny that this day is especially hard. I'm not sure if that means I need to go back to therapy." The kettle whistled, and Helen poured the hot water into 2 cups, bringing them to the coffee table in front of the sofa. The comforting aroma of Earl Grey and lavender filled the air, providing a small moment of peace in the midst of their shared grief. As they sat together, sipping their tea, Laura felt grateful for Helen's presence. They had formed a bond through their shared tragedy, supporting each other through the years when it seemed like no one else could truly understand their pain. The weight of their loss hung heavy in the air, but there was also a sense of solidarity, a reminder that they were not alone in their grief. Helen set her teacup down and turned to Laura with a gentle smile. "You know, my psychologist told me something that's been helpful," she said. "We should face our pain whenever it comes and accept it as part of ourselves, not try to hide or bypass it." Helen paused, considering her next words carefully. "I was thinking, maybe we could look at some photos together, if you're up for it, of course." Laura took another sip of her tea, letting the warm liquid soothe her. After a moment, she nodded. "I think that might be good," she said softly. Helen stood up and walked to the TV cabinet, pulling out a photo album. She returned to the sofa and sat close to Laura, placing the album between them. As they began to flip through the pages, a flood of memories washed over them. The photos chronicled happier times, their children's first day of school, birthday parties, and family picnics. Laura and Helen found themselves sharing stories and reminiscing about the past, their voices a mixture of laughter and tears. "Do you remember when Rory and Sally first started at that school?" Laura asked, pointing to a picture of the two girls in their uniforms. Helen nodded, a wistful smile on her face. "Fifth grade, wasn't it?" The school had only been open for 2 years at that point. "That's right," Laura confirmed. "I remember how small the class was at first, just 6 students. But by the end of that year, it had grown to 15. The school really put a lot of effort into marketing, didn't they?" Helen mused, all those discounted fees to attract parents. They continued to flip through the album. Laura's eye was suddenly drawn to a photo she had never seen before. It showed Rory and Sally along with some of their classmates working on a science project during the school science fair. The children's faces were alight with enthusiasm, completely unaware of the tragedy that would befall them. "This picture. It's beautiful," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you get it from?" Helen looked at the photo and explained, "I received it from the police a few months ago. Since the case went cold, they allowed parents to collect copies of evidence materials. I went down to the station and requested everything they had." Laura was surprised. "I didn't know we could do that. If I had known, I would have asked for copies too." Helen gave her a sad smile. "Maybe it's better that you didn't. To be honest, having all this evidence, it's made it harder for me to move on. That's part of why I needed therapy. I spent so many sleepless nights poring over those files, looking for something, anything that might give us answers." As they continued to look through the photos, Laura came across another unfamiliar image. It was a class picture taken in front of a yellow school bus, the very bus that had taken the children on that fateful trip. Laura studied the photo intently, her eyes scanning each face. Suddenly, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. "Helen," she said, her voice filled with confusion and a hint of hope. "Why is Principal Lillian Brooks in this picture? I thought Mr. Gregory, the classroom teacher, went alone with the kids and just one support staff that day." Helen leaned in to look at the photo more closely. "You know, I'm not entirely sure," she said, furrowing her brow. "I remember hearing rumors from some other parents that the staff member was actually the principal, but I never gave it much thought." Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. All these years she had believed it was just the teacher and a co-teacher or admin staff on that trip. The presence of the principal in this photo raised questions she had never considered before. As Laura opened her mouth to voice her concerns, Helen gently placed a hand on her arm. "Laura," she said softly, "I know that look in your eyes. We've been down this road before, thinking we found something crucial dozens, if not hundreds of times. It's not good for us to cling to false hope." Laura wanted to argue, to insist that this detail could be important, but she saw the concern in Helen's eyes. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the surge of emotions within her. "You're right," she said finally, though a part of her still clung to the nagging doubt. "It's probably nothing." Helen gave her a sympathetic smile and turned back to the photo album. "Look," she said, pointing to the bus in the background. "This photo was most likely taken before the trip, on school grounds. That would explain why the principal was there." Laura nodded, though not entirely convinced. She glanced at the clock on the wall and realized they had been talking for almost an hour. "Helen, I hate to do this, but I should probably get going," she said, standing up. "I want to visit Rory's grave, bring her some flowers and tidy up a bit. I do it every year, you know." Helen nodded in understanding. "Of course. Would you like some company? Sally's grave is in the same area." Laura appreciated the offer but saw the hesitation in Helen's eyes. "That's kind of you, but I know you prefer to go with Matthew later. It'll be all right." As Laura prepared to leave, she paused and turned back to Helen. "Would it be all right if I took that photo with me? The one with the school bus?" Helen seemed to consider for a moment before nodding. "Of course, but Laura, promise me you won't let this consume you. We can't afford to go down that rabbit hole again." Laura assured her friend she would be careful, but as she left Helen's house and made her way to the bus stop, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something important. The image of Principal Lillian Brooks standing with the children before their ill-fated trip burned in her mind, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit with the story she had been told for the past 27 years. As she waited for the bus that would take her to town to buy flowers from her local favorite florist, Laura found herself torn between the desire to uncover the truth and the fear of reopening old wounds. The sky above her grew darker, threatening rain, much like the storm of emotions brewing within her. She silently prayed that the rain would hold off until she had finished her visit to the cemetery, allowing her this one day to honor her daughter's memory in peace. Laura sat on the bus, lost in thought as it made its way through the familiar streets towards the town center. She held the photo in her hands, unable to tear her eyes away from the image of her daughter and her classmates, frozen in time on that fateful day. The more she studied the picture, the more questions arose in her mind. Helen's words echoed in her head, warning her not to cling to false hope, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why had some parents believed the principal went on the trip while others, like herself, had been told it was just the teacher and a support staff? She prided herself on being an active and involved parent, attending all meetings and gatherings, even the school trials and hearings when they, the victims' parents, had sought justice in court. How could such a crucial detail have escaped her notice? Laura hesitated for a moment before pulling out her phone. She had the officer's personal number saved from long ago, but she wasn't sure if he would still remember her, or if he'd even want to. The thought made her stomach clench, but she was resolved to make the call anyway. She glanced around the nearly empty bus. The worn seats were speckled with faint graffiti, and the dim fluorescent lights flickered every now and then. "Outside, the Nightborhood Blue-Red passt." Taking a breath, she dialed the number, pressing the phone tightly against her ear. The first call went unanswered. She swallowed and tried again. Still nothing, just the mechanical drone of a voicemail prompt. Laura's fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to leave a message. What would she even say? "Hi, it's been years, but I need your help. Do you remember me?" It felt foolish, desperate. She shook her head and ended the call without leaving a voicemail, slipping her phone back into her purse. The bus jerked slightly as it came to another stop. She glanced outside and suddenly felt a jolt of recognition. This was near the principal's house. The sight of the old neighborhood sent a chill through her, stirring memories she thought she had buried. Without fully thinking it through, she stood up just as the bus doors were about to close. She pressed the bell and stepped out, apologizing to the driver as she exited. Standing on the sidewalk, Laura suddenly felt foolish. She had no idea if the principal was home, or even if she still lived at the same address after all these years. She vaguely remembered the street but couldn't recall the exact house number. Checking the bus timetable at the stop, she saw that the next bus wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. Well, she muttered to herself, I might as well try while I'm here. Laura began walking down the street, her eyes scanning the houses for anything familiar. The neighborhood had changed over the years, with some houses renovated and others showing signs of age. After several minutes of wandering, she found herself in front of a house that stirred a faint memory. She stood on the sidewalk, studying the property. The garden was well maintained, with neatly trimmed hedges and colorful flower beds. A car was parked in the driveway, but Laura couldn't be sure if it belonged to Principal Brooks, or if she even still lived here. As she hesitated on the sidewalk, Laura realized that she had never truly spoken to Principal Brooks outside of a few brief encounters. There was the day of the disappearance when the principal had offered her condolences, and once when Laura had come with other parents to protest at her house. They had also exchanged words at the police station years ago, but beyond that, their interactions had been minimal despite living in the same neighborhood. Taking a deep breath, Laura walked up to the porch and knocked on the door. She waited, her heart pounding, but there was no answer from inside. Just as she was about to turn and leave, feeling embarrassed by her impulsive decision, she noticed two women walking along the sidewalk. One of the women appeared to be in her mid-30s, while the other was older, closer to Laura's age, and as they turned onto the walkway leading to the house, their eyes met Laura's. She immediately recognized the older woman as Principal Lillian Brooks, even though time had added lines to her face and softened the sharpness of her features. The principal didn't seem to recognize Laura at first, her expression polite but questioning. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice kind but cautious. Laura swallowed hard, suddenly feeling nervous. "I'm Laura Calloway," she said, watching as recognition dawned on the principal's face. Principal Brooks froze for a moment, her composure slipping as she began to stutter. "Oh, Mrs. Calloway, please, just give me a moment." She turned to the younger woman, ushering her towards the house. "Why don't you go inside and make yourself comfortable? I'll be right there." As the principal fumbled with her keys to unlock the door, Laura's mind raced. She knew the principal had no children, so who was this younger woman? Was she interrupting something important? Once the younger woman was inside, Principal Brooks followed her in, Laura saw as she switched on the lights of the house. Laura decided to approach closer to the doorway, waiting at the threshold. Laura debated whether she should call out or wait, but as the minutes stretched on, impatience crept in. The house was eerily quiet, except for the faintest murmur of voices in the distance. After a beat, she raised her hand and knocked again, despite the fact that the door was still slightly ajar. Footsteps, then suddenly the door swung open wider. Lillian reappeared in a rush. Wiping her hands dry on the sides of her blouse as if she had just finished washing them. "I'm so sorry for the wait," she said, forcing a small chuckle. She hesitated. "Forgive me, but your name. It sounds familiar, but I can't quite place it." Laura inhaled deeply before answering. "I'm Rory Calloway's mother," she said, watching the woman's reaction closely. "My daughter was in the 5th grade class of 1996. She vanished during the school trip." The principal's face paled, and she struggled to maintain her smile. Laura couldn't help but notice how nervous she seemed, her eyes darting between Laura and the woman inside, visible through the barely open door behind her. Laura caught sight of the woman standing inside the house. She wasn't part of the conversation, yet she lingered in the background as if she was watching, listening. Principal Brooks cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. "Mrs. Calloway, I'm no longer the school principal, you see. I took early retirement some years ago. May I ask why you're here? Laura paused for a moment before deciding to be direct. I have a question about the day of the school trip. I'm sorry for showing up unannounced. I was in the area when it came to mind, she said, keeping her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. I won't take much of your time, I promise. The principal glanced over her shoulder again at the woman inside, then back to Laura. All right, she said reluctantly, but I can't stay long. I have a guest waiting. Laura nodded in understanding and reached into her purse, pulling out the class photo. She held it up for Principal Brooks to see. This picture, Laura began, was it taken at the school or during the trip? Principal Lillian narrowed her eyes as she studied the photo. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, her brow furrowed. I think it was during. She started, then quickly revised her statement. No, it was taken at the school parking lot. Laura's heart skipped a beat at the principal's hesitation. She pressed on. Were you on the trip that day? The principal's eyes widened slightly, and she shook her head. No, I stayed at the school. Mr. Gregory, the classroom teacher, and a staff member from administration went on the trip. It was supposed to be me, but I had an important, last-minute matter to attend to, so the admin took my place. Laura nodded slowly, processing this information. It aligned with what she had always believed, but something still felt off. She decided to ask one more question, hoping it wouldn't push too far. This might be my last question, if you don't mind. Did you notice anything suspicious about Mr. Gregory that day? Anything at all? At this, Principal Brooks' demeanor changed. Her voice took on an edge of annoyance as she replied, No, Mrs. Calloway. I've given all these statements to the police countless times. I never would have thought Mr. Gregory capable of something like this. She paused, her expression softening slightly. I would prefer not to speak about it anymore. It was heartbreaking for me too, and I found some closure. I don't want to open old wounds again. Laura felt a pang of guilt at the principal's words. She hadn't meant to cause more pain. I'm sorry, she said softly. I understand truly. It's just, I still can't believe my daughter just disappeared into thin air. To her surprise, Laura felt tears welling up in her eyes. I hoped. I don't know what I hoped, that maybe you'd have an answer after all this time. Laura reached into her purse and pulled out a pocket tissue, dabbing at her eyes. As her vision cleared, she noticed the younger woman inside watching them intently. There was a mix of curiosity and concern in her gaze, and Principal Brooks' expression softened further. I understand the pain, Mrs. Calloway. It's one of the reasons I took early retirement. As long as I worked at that school, I could never overcome the grief. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and embraced Laura briefly. I know that today marks 27 years. You're not the first parent to come here on this day over the years. Laura was taken aback by the sudden show of emotion from the principal. She put the photo back into her purse as they parted. She managed a weak smile. Thank you for your time. I should go now. I'm sorry for taking up your afternoon. As Laura turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The principal's initial hesitation, the presence of the mysterious younger woman, and the subtle inconsistencies in her answers all gnawed at her mind. Yet, she also knew that her suspicions might just be her overthinking everything. Helen was right. She couldn't afford to lose herself in false hope again. Walking back towards the bus stop, Laura's mind raced with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall, matching her somber mood. As she reached the shelter of the bus stop, she pulled out her phone and stared at it, wondering if she should try to contact the police officer who had been assigned to the case once again. But before Laura could make up her mind, the bus arrived. She stepped on board and settled into a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away from the curb, she clutched the photo tightly to her chest. The rain continued to pour, a steady rhythm against the pavement outside, though at least the wind had settled. Laura sat on the bus, her mind whirling with thoughts and questions. The encounter with Principal Brooks had left her with more doubts than answers, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the bus made its way through the rain-slicked streets, with a sigh, she pulled out her phone, hoping for a notification, a missed call, anything. But the screen remained blank. No reply from the police officer. Laura's stop came into view, and she disembarked, stepping out into the light drizzle. The florist shop was just down the street, its colorful display of flowers a stark contrast to the gray day. As she approached, Laura paused under the awning of a nearby shop, hoping the rain would let up. There, in the wait, she hesitated, debating whether to call again. Would it make a difference? After her conversation with the principal, she doubted she'd get anything new. The officer would probably just echo what she had already heard. With a quiet sigh, she slipped the phone back into her bag. Maybe Helen was right. Maybe she was just reopening old wounds for nothing. But no matter how much she tried to push it aside, the image of the young woman in Principal Brooks' house and the principal's nervous behavior kept nagging at her. Something about it didn't sit right. Deciding she had waited long enough, Laura took a deep breath and made a run for the florist shop, holding her purse over her head as a makeshift umbrella. The cold rain clung to her skin, seeping through the fabric of her clothes, but she barely noticed. She just had to cross the street, getting a little wet wouldn't matter. Reaching the shop, she pushed the door open, and the soft chime of the bell overhead announced her arrival. The shift from the chilly rain to the warm, fragrant air inside was immediate. The scent of fresh flowers enveloped her, a soothing blend of roses. "Mrs. Calloway," the florist said, recognizing her. "I was wondering if we'd see you today." Laura managed a small smile in return. "Hello, Sarah. Yes, I'm here for my usual order." As Sarah began to gather the flowers Laura typically chose for Rory's grave, Laura found herself scanning the shop's selection. The variety seemed less extensive than in previous years, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. Noticing Laura's expression, Sarah explained apologetically, "I'm sorry, we don't have as much variety this year. The weather's been unpredictable, and it's affected our suppliers." Laura nodded in understanding. "It's all right, Sarah. I'm sure we can still put together something beautiful for Rory." As Sarah continued to gather flowers, the bell above the door chimed again. Laura turned to see Helen and her husband Matthew entering the shop. Their eyes met, and for a moment Laura saw surprise and then concern flash across Helen's face. "Laura," Helen said, approaching her friend. "I thought you'd have gone to the florist earlier. Is everything all right?" Laura hesitated, unsure how much to share about her impromptu visit to Principal Brooks' house. I got a bit sidetracked," she said finally, "but it's good to see you both." Matthew shook Laura's hand warmly. "It's good to see you too, Laura. How are you holding up?" Before Laura could answer, Sarah returned with an armful of flowers. "Here you are, Mrs. Calloway. Would you like to arrange them yourself, as usual?" Laura nodded, grateful for the distraction. "Yes, thank you, Sarah. I'll do that." As Laura began to arrange the flowers, carefully selecting each stem and placing it with care, Helen and Matthew chose their own bouquet for Sally's grave. The shop was quiet except for the soft rustling of paper and the occasional murmur of conversation between the couple. Laura found herself lost in thought as she worked, her hands moving almost of their own accord as she created a beautiful arrangement. The familiar task was soothing, allowing her mind to wander back to her encounter with Principal Brooks. Should she tell Helen about it? Would her friend understand her suspicions, or would she think Laura was grasping at straws again? As she finished tying a ribbon around the bouquet, Laura glanced up to see Helen watching her with a mixture of affection and concern. "That's beautiful, Laura," Helen said softly. "Rory would have loved it." Laura felt tears prick at her eyes at the mention of her daughter's name. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I hope so." The three of them made their way to the counter to pay for their flowers. As Sarah wrapped Helen's bouquet, Laura found herself studying her friend's face. There was a sadness there, a weight of grief that Laura recognized all too well, but there was also a calmness, a sense of acceptance that Laura envied. "Helen," Laura said suddenly, her voice low, "there's something I need to tell you about today." Helen turned to her, curiosity mingling with concern in her eyes. "What is it, Laura?" Laura took a deep breath, steeling herself. "After I left your house, I went to see Principal Brooks." Helen's eyes widened in surprise. "You did what? Why?" Before Laura could explain, Sarah handed them their wrapped bouquets. "Here you are, ladies. I hope these bring you some comfort today." Laura and Helen thanked her, and as they turned to leave the shop, Laura could feel the weight of Helen's questioning gaze. She knew she owed her friend an explanation, but she wasn't sure how to put her suspicions into words without sounding like she was chasing ghosts. As they stepped out onto the sidewalk, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent in the air. Matthew suggested they all go to the cemetery together, and Laura found herself nodding in agreement. As they walked towards Matthew's car, Laura knew she would have to share what she had learned, or what she thought she had learned, with Helen. But as she clutched her bouquet of flowers, a small part of her wondered if she was ready to face the potential consequences of digging up the past once again. As they settled into Matthew's car, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. Helen turned in her seat to face Laura, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Laura," she began gently, "why did you go to see Principal Brooks? What were you hoping to find?" Laura took a deep breath, clutching the bouquet of flowers in her lap. She knew she had to choose her words carefully. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that class photo, the one with the school bus." Helen's brow furrowed. "The one we looked at earlier? What about it?" "I asked her about it, and she said it was taken at the school before the trip." "But Helen..." At first she said it was during, then she quickly corrected herself and said it was before. "Don't you find that strange?" "It felt like she was hiding something," Laura explained, her voice growing more animated, the weight of suspicion pressing harder on her chest. Matthew glanced at Laura in the rearview mirror, his expression neutral. "Laura, it's been 27 years. Memory can play tricks on us, especially with such a traumatic event." Laura nodded, acknowledging his point. I know. But there was something else. When I arrived at her house, there was a young woman there, someone I'd never seen before. And the principal. She seemed nervous, like she didn't want that woman to know what we were talking about." Helen and Matthew exchanged a look that Laura couldn't quite decipher. After a moment of silence, Helen spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Laura, I understand the need to find answers, believe me, I do. But we've been down this road before. Remember 3 years ago when you thought you'd found a connection between the bus driver and that cold case in Oregon?" Laura felt a flush of embarrassment at the memory. She had spent weeks convinced she'd uncovered a vital clue, only to have it lead nowhere. "This is different," she insisted, though a small part of her wondered if she was trying to convince herself as much as her friends. The car fell silent as they drove through the familiar streets towards the cemetery. Laura stared out the window, watching as the town gave way to more rural surroundings. The sky was clearing, patches of blue appearing between the clouds. As they approached the cemetery gates, Matthew broke the silence. "Laura, we care about you. We don't want to see you get hurt again by false hope." Laura nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. I know, she said softly. I can't help the feelings. Rory and Sally, and all the others, deserve more than just acceptance. They deserve the truth. Helen reached back and squeezed Laura's hand. They do, she agreed. But sometimes the truth is that we may never know everything, and that's something we have to learn to live with. As Matthew parked the car, Laura felt a mix of emotions washing over her. The familiar grief, the persistent hope, and now a new feeling of determination. She knew her friends meant well, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with Principal Brooks had opened a door that had long been closed. They stepped out into the cool, damp air, the scent of freshly turned earth lingering as they made their way through the cemetery. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a quiet, almost eerie stillness. Their footsteps were muffled by the soft ground as they walked toward Rory and Sally's graves. Close, though not side by side, but still near enough that Helen and Laura had arranged them together, a small comfort in their shared grief. Laura approached Rory's tombstone first, her heart heavy as she knelt down, placing the bouquet of flowers gently at its base. The petals, still fresh with morning dew, added a small burst of color against the gray stone. She ran her fingers over the engraved name, tracing each letter as if memorizing it all over again. It always tore at her heart that this tombstone marked an empty grave, no body beneath it, no real closure. They had needed somewhere to direct their grief, somewhere tangible to visit, but the absence of Rory's remains haunted her. This stone monument was both a comfort and a cruel reminder of all they didn't know. With a quiet sigh, she reached into her purse, pulling out the worn photograph. She held it up, studying her daughter's face, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing over the image. The ache in her chest deepened as memories flooded back, Rory's laughter, the way she used to tug at her sleeve when she wanted attention, the last time Laura had kissed her goodbye. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she let herself grieve, the pain as raw as the day it all happened. She didn't try to stop the sobs this time, letting them come freely. After a while, when the weight of her sorrow eased just enough to breathe, Laura wiped her tears and slowly stood. She turned, glancing toward Helen and Matthew who stood by Sally's grave a few feet away, her own expression lost in quiet mourning. Laura took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to join her. But just as Laura was about to approach Helen, something caught her eye. Laura stopped in her tracks. In the distance, near the plot where most of the children from the school were buried, she saw a familiar figure. It was the young woman from Principal Brooks' house. She wasn't just passing through, she was standing still, staring down at a headstone, her hands clasped together as if in quiet contemplation. Laura's pulse quickened. Was this just a coincidence, or was there something more to it? Setting her grief aside for the moment, Laura observed the woman. She stood within the section of the cemetery where most of the missing schoolchildren had been laid to rest. Many families had chosen this burial ground. It was the only proper cemetery not too far away from the neighborhood. Laura's heart began to race. Without a second thought, she turned in the other direction. Gently patting Helen's arm, she murmured, "I'll be right back," her voice barely above a whisper. Before Helen or Matthew could say anything, Laura was already walking briskly towards the young woman. As she approached, she could see that the woman was crying, her shoulders shaking as she stood in front of one of the graves. "Excuse me," Laura called out softly, not wanting to startle her. The woman turned, surprise and fear flashing across her face as she recognized Laura. She quickly wiped her tears away as if trying to compose herself. "We meet again," Laura continued, her gaze steady. "I think I saw you at Principal Lillian's house earlier." The woman lowered her eyes, shifting uncomfortably. She looked as though she wanted to retreat, as if Laura's presence was making her feel exposed. "I'm sorry," Laura added quickly, "I don't mean to intrude." The woman exhaled softly, then shook her head. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I come here every year on this day to grieve." Laura nodded in understanding. So do I, though I usually visit early in the morning. But today, I was late. She glanced at her watch. 4 p.m. A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then Laura gently asked, "Who are you grieving for? Were you related to one of the students who went missing 27 years ago?" The woman hesitated, her lips parting slightly before pressing together again. For a moment, she seemed to consider her response, then gave a slow, almost reluctant nod. Laura sensed her unease and didn't press further, but as her eyes drifted toward the tombstone, she noticed a small framed photograph placed near the grave. The image was blurred by age, clinging to the glass, but Laura could make out the outline of a young girl's face. The woman followed Laura's gaze, and as if realizing what she was looking at, swiftly reached down and picked up the photograph, clutching it tightly to her chest. "I'm sorry," Laura said softly, "I didn't mean to invade your privacy." She met the woman's eyes, her own filled with understanding. "You must have really loved and missed your sister. I understand that feeling." Laura took a step back, preparing to leave, not wanting to cause the woman more distress. But just as she turned, the woman called out, her voice uncertain but firm. "Wait," she said. Laura paused, looking back. "Why did you go to Principal Lillian's house earlier?" The unexpected question caught Laura off guard. She turned fully to face the woman, studying her expression. There was something more than curiosity in her eyes, something deeper, something cautious. "I was just asking about the day of the school trip," Laura admitted. "I wanted to know if she was there when the students left, or if she went with them." Reaching into her purse, Laura pulled out the now slightly crinkled photograph Helen had shown her. She extended it toward the woman. "My friend Helen, over there." Laura gestured toward Helen and Matthew, who were still standing by Sally's grave. "She showed me this photo earlier. I had never seen it before, and it confused me. I didn't remember Principal Lillian being there that day." The woman stared at the picture, her grip tightening on her own framed photograph. Laura sighed, shaking her head slightly. Principal Lillian confirmed that this picture was taken in the school parking lot before the trip, but... She trailed off, unsure how to finish the thought. The woman stared at the photograph, her expression shifting as she took in the faces of the children. A chuckle escaped her lips. Light yet laced with sorrow. But then, as her gaze lingered on one face in particular, tears slipped down her cheeks. The words came out in a hushed whisper, tinged with affection and heartache. Rory was such a character. Laura's ears perked up at the name. "Did you know Rory?" she asked, unable to hide the urgency in her voice. The woman seemed startled, as if she hadn't expected anyone to catch her words. She returned the class picture to Laura, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm Rory's mother," Laura said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Do you know something about Rory?" The woman froze, her posture suddenly defensive, as if Laura had cornered her. Confusion washed over Laura as she noticed the woman's eyes dart toward the framed photograph she still clutched against her chest. The resemblance between the woman and the girl in the frame was striking, and it sent a shiver down Laura's spine. "Who are you?" Laura asked slowly, her tone measured. "Are you this girl?" She pointed to the photo, her heart racing. The woman's response was immediate and vehement. "No," she shouted, but the fear in her voice suggested otherwise, as if she was trying to mask a deeper truth. "It's okay," Laura said softly, stepping closer. "You don't need to be scared. Are you one of the survivors? This girl?" The woman shook her head quickly, panic flashing in her eyes, but the speed of her denial only reinforced Laura's suspicions. It felt like another lie. "I think you're mistaken." "That's not me," the woman insisted, but Laura could see the conflict in her gaze. "No," Laura replied, her voice firm yet compassionate. You know it's you. It's undeniably you. The woman's shoulders slumped, and she looked defeated. You don't want to know who I am, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. It's better for everyone involved. Please. Laura pleaded, desperation creeping into her words. For all these years, I've never been able to understand my daughter's disappearance. It's been eating me alive. I come here every year to honor her, and after a few months, the pain in my heart eases, but then this day comes around and it's like an endless torment on my soul. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stepped closer, her heart aching for answers. If you know anything, please tell me. The woman's eyes flickered with emotion, and Laura pressed on, her voice growing steadier. Why were you at Principal Lillian's house earlier? You can't be her daughter. I know Lillian doesn't have a daughter. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. The woman's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment it felt like the world had paused, both of them caught in a web of secrets and unspeakable truths. After a heavy pause, the woman finally relented, her voice barely above a whisper. You're right. I'm one of the missing students. A survivor. Laura's heart raced, disbelief washing over her. What? She gasped, struggling to process the weight of Audrey's words. Who? But when the woman confirmed, my name is Audrey Whitman, recognition flooded over Laura. Audrey's name had been etched into the tombstone she had seen during countless visits, a haunting reminder of the tragedy. You were in my daughter's class, Laura murmured, trying to keep her reaction in check. Did your family know you were alive? Audrey shook her head, her expression heavy with pain. No. That's why I come to the grave later in the day. My parents always come in the morning. Laura nodded, recalling the times she had seen Audrey's parents at the cemetery, always at that same hour, their faces etched with grief. Why didn't you come back home? She asked gently, not wanting to pry but unable to contain her curiosity. I'm too broken, Audrey replied, her voice trembling. It's a long story. Laura's heart ached for the young woman before her, burdened by a past she couldn't escape. You don't have to share it all with me, she said softly. But please, I'm begging you, turn yourself in to the police. Give them your testimony and evidence. Audrey shook her head vehemently. No. The principal said I'd only hurt everyone. Dozens of families. Shock coursed through Laura at the mention of Principal Lillian. Lillian Brooks knew you were alive all this time, and she discouraged you? Laura could hardly believe it. Why would she do that? I trusted her, Audrey confessed, her voice cracking. She was the only one who understood my pain. Laura felt a surge of emotion. Audrey, living in this unknown. That's pain. We're already in pain. It can't get any worse than this, she added. But your testimony, it could help us. You'd be saving us all, providing us with the closure we desperately need by revealing the truth. Audrey looked up, her eyes searching Laura for sincerity. Really? Laura nodded fervently, her heart aching for both the women's lost children. Yes. You'd be helping the victims' families. Please, Audrey. After a prolonged silence, the impact of Laura's words started to sink in. With shaking hands, Audrey took a deep breath and reached for her phone. I think you're right. I've wrestled with this decision for a long time, but Lillian always discouraged me, and I believed she had her reasons. But seeing you here now. I'll call the police, she said, her voice gaining strength. As they waited for the officer to arrive, Laura's mind raced. Desperation clawed at her throat. Audrey, please, do you know where my daughter Rory is? Audrey's expression shifted to one of sadness. She nodded slowly, her gaze heavy with unspoken sorrow. What do you mean? Laura pressed, her heart pounding in her chest. Where is she? Just then, Helen and Matthew approached, their eyes scanning the area for Laura. The tension thickened as Audrey's fear intensified, the realization that another victim's family was near filling her with dread. "Laura, what's going on?" Helen asked, looking between her friend and the stranger. "Who is this?" Laura took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "Helen, Matthew, this is Audrey Whitman. She was on the bus that day. She's alive." Just as Audrey opened her mouth to respond, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the air. The sound seemed to freeze the moment, and Audrey instinctively flinched, her instincts urging her to flee. But Laura's voice broke through the chaos. "Audrey, if you love Rory and Sally, you owe it to them to tell the truth," she called, her tone firm yet compassionate. Audrey paused, her feet rooted in place as she turned to face Laura, Helen, and Matthew. She saw the confusion etched on their faces and the desperation in Laura's eyes, which felt like a lifeline amidst her turmoil. "Okay," Audrey finally said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'll talk, but at the station." Just then, 2 police officers arrived, their presence adding an air of urgency to the scene. They approached Audrey, confirming if she was the one who had called. "What's your name?" one of the officers asked. "Audrey Calloway. I'm one of the survivors of the missing children from 27 years ago," she stated, her voice growing steadier as she spoke the words that had been trapped inside her for so long. The officers exchanged glances before one of them radioed the station, requesting a system check on her name. While they waited for confirmation, the officers turned to the small group gathered in the cemetery. "We need everyone to come with us to the station. We can't have any disturbances here," one officer said firmly. Audrey nodded, her face pale but determined, and she followed the officers to their squad car. Laura walked alongside Helen and Matthew as they made their way to their own car, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Once inside, Laura couldn't hold back. "You won't believe what just happened," she began, her voice shaking with disbelief. She recounted everything to Helen and Matthew, the revelation about Audrey, the principal's knowledge of a survivor, and how it all felt like a sinister puzzle with missing pieces. Matthew frowned, furrowing his brow. "This is all so strange. Why would the principal keep something like that from us?" "I don't know," Laura admitted, "but it feels like there's something deeper at play. Whatever truth Audrey holds, it must be significant enough that it could put Lillian in danger." As they arrived at the police station, the trio stepped inside, the atmosphere tense with uncertainty. Laura spotted Officer Jensen, the same officer she had tried to reach before. He looked up from his paperwork and immediately approached them. "I'm sorry I couldn't take your call earlier. I was tied up with an urgent case," he explained, his voice apologetic. Laura felt a mix of frustration and urgency. "Officer, you need to take this seriously. Audrey has confessed that she's a survivor. She's finally ready to talk," she insisted, her heart racing. "If that's true, we'll reopen the case," Officer Jensen replied, his demeanor shifting to one of focus. He motioned for Audrey to follow him into an interview room, leaving Laura, Helen, and Matthew waiting anxiously in the sterile waiting area. As the door closed behind Audrey, Laura felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. She could only pray that Audrey would summon the courage to speak the truth, that this moment would finally bring some answers and perhaps some closure to all the families affected by the tragedy. Not long after Audrey was led into the interrogation room, Laura, Helen, and Matthew began to notice movement throughout the police station. Officers bustled around, their voices rising in urgency as they received orders. The air was thick with anticipation as they overheard commands being shouted. A unit was dispatched to Principal Lillian's house with an arrest warrant. Hope flickered in Laura's chest, and she exchanged glances with Helen and Matthew. This was it. Audrey must have shared everything she knew with the officers. Just then, The sharp sound of police sirens sliced through the air as the unit departed, and the tension in the room grew palpable. Less than an hour later, the anticipation turned into reality as the officers returned, leading a handcuffed Principal Lillian into the police station. She walked with her head down, the weight of her circumstances evident in her slumped shoulders. "I'm sorry," she mumbled as she locked eyes with Laura, Helen, and Matthew, her voice barely above a whisper. But the officers pushed her forward with unwavering authority, guiding her toward the booking area. Hours crawled by as Laura, Helen, and Matthew sat in anxious silence, each lost in their thoughts about what had just unfolded. Then they saw an officer enter the room where Audrey was being questioned. Laura leaned in closer, straining to catch snippets of the muffled conversation. She heard the officer mention something about Lillian Brooks' statement being ready, and that she had confessed the whole truth. Before long, the officer emerged from the room and beckoned Laura, Helen, and Matthew to join him. Their hearts raced as they followed him into the interrogation room, where Audrey sat, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. Inside, the atmosphere felt charged with urgency. The officer wasted no time in laying out the details of the case. "Principal Brooks has confessed during her interrogation," he began, his voice steady but somber. "She was the one who organized the entire class trip. She framed the teacher, Mr. Gregory, to take the fall for what happened. She was under immense pressure, she had debts she couldn't pay, and the loan sharks turned out to be dangerous. They threatened her family." Laura's breath caught in her throat as the officer continued. "The trip that was meant to be for Big Bend Park was sabotaged. It appears that Principal Brooks conspired with the kidnappers, resulting in the driver's death. The body couldn't be found, as you already know from our initial investigation. Then they abducted the teacher and the children, transporting them to a border area in Mexico, where all the kids were trafficked and smuggled into another country. They were forced into organ trafficking." Laura's heart sank as the officer hesitated, a grim look crossing his face. "This may be hard to hear, but I need to tell you the whole truth." The female students were targeted for various forms of exploitation by Mexican gangsters in Mexico. The male students. He paused, swallowing hard. They were sold overseas for child labor. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Laura felt her stomach twist in knots as the horrifying reality of the situation sank in. She glanced at Helen and Matthew, who looked equally stunned, their faces pale as they processed the terrible revelations. Audrey sat in the room, her eyes cast downward as she suddenly spoke up to Laura and Helen. "I was the only one who made it out alive," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of memories. 12 years ago, I managed to escape from the man who had purchased me and forced me into exploitation. Even after getting away, I was too traumatized and mentally destroyed to face my parents." Her gaze flickered to Laura and Matthew, a mix of shame and pain etched on her face. "That's when I somehow connected with Principal Brooks. She helped me build a new life, paid for my apartment, and covered my living expenses. But in return, I couldn't tell anyone the truth. She said it would only add to the distress of the victims' families." Laura's heart raced as she processed Audrey's words. She couldn't fathom the emotional manipulation that had kept Audrey silent for so long. What about the other children? Did anyone else survive? "My Rory?" she asked, desperation creeping into her tone. Audrey shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I honestly don't know about the others. We were mostly split up, but I remember Rory and Sally didn't make it." "Rory? She died the very day of the kidnapping, from an overdose they gave her. Sally was next. They didn't get the dosage right for her either." At those words, Laura and Helen broke down in tears, their grief crashing over them like a tidal wave. Audrey felt a pang of guilt, her heart aching for the pain she had unwittingly stirred. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, her voice cracking. This is what I feared most. Principal Lillian was right. But Laura, wiping away her tears, shook her head firmly. You did the right thing, Audrey. This is painful, yes, but we finally have closure. We can start healing now. The police, having listened intently, spoke up. With this new evidence, we can reopen the case. Thanks to you, Audrey, we might be able to locate some of the other students. Laura felt her heart racing. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We're reopening the case right away. We're in the process of filing charges against Lillian Brooks and have already contacted authorities in Mexico to pursue this new information. Audrey, we recognize the immense trauma you've endured, and we won't hold you accountable for withholding information. However, we are offering you witness protection, as it's essential now that the investigation into the trafficking ring begins. We anticipate that they may attempt to locate you again. The officer paused, his expression softening as he looked at Laura, Helen, and Matthew. I know this must be incredibly difficult for you to have hope rekindled after all these years, only to. He trailed off, unable to find the right words. And Laura nodded, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. At least now we know, she said softly. After all these years, we finally know what happened to our children. The other victims' families deserve to know about this too. The police assured everyone that they would reach out to the families of the other victims now that the case was being reopened. As they prepared to leave the station, Audrey emerged from the interview room. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, but there was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Thank you, she said to Laura, her voice thick with emotion, for believing me, for helping me find the courage to come forward. Laura embraced her, feeling a connection to this young woman who had survived unimaginable horrors. Thank you for telling the truth, she whispered. You've given us all a chance at closure. As Laura, Helen, and Matthew stepped out of the police station into the fading light of day, Laura felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was grief, of course, a fresh wave of sorrow for the daughter she had lost, but there was also a sense of peace, of a chapter finally closing after being left open for far too long. She looked at Helen and Matthew, saw the same complex emotions reflected in their eyes. They had lived with uncertainty for 27 years, and while the truth was painful, it was also, in its own way, a relief. What now? Helen asked softly as they stood in the parking lot, the weight of the day's events heavy upon them. Laura took a deep breath, looking up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Now, she said, her voice steady, we honor our children's memory by making sure justice is served, and we help Audrey build a new life, the life she was denied for so long. As they made their way home, Laura felt a shift within herself. The grief was still there, a constant companion after all these years, but alongside it now was a sense of purpose, a determination to see this through to the end. For Rory, for Sally, for all the children lost that day, and for Audrey, who had survived against all odds. Laura silently vowed to keep fighting until the full truth was known and those responsible were held accountable. The road ahead would be long and undoubtedly painful, but for the first time in 27 years, Laura felt like she was finally on the path to answers and perhaps, eventually, to a kind of peace she had thought forever out of reach.